back to. Because otherwise we sort of use those terms, and they're used obviously in many different ways. They can be freedom to be on somebody's flag or something like that, but we try to get to a fundamental understanding of the experience of freedom, responsibility, and justice. So, in this first overlay, I'm in a sense claiming freedom, responsibility, and justice are founded on the face-to-face experience of inequality. That is, that the other person comes before the self. Modern Western political philosophies, of course, urge us to teach freedom, responsibility, and justice based upon the assumption of equality, that is, at their best and at their worst, on self-interest. Those political philosophies. Equality is assumed in our Western society, certainly. Equality is assumed in democratic societies to be the first principle of social justice. However, many ancient traditions begin with the experience of the concrete interpersonal relationships where the other has priority over the self. And I'll point a little bit to the particular ancient, and that is the Judaic tradition. And the reason I point to that, and that is I'm going to use the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas as the support then on how to make this claim that the other has priority for me. The descriptions of Emmanuel Levinas, contemporary philosopher, Jewish theologian, offers a phenomenology of the facing of the other person, the very facing of the other. He wants to do a phenomenology of what is that experience of the other individual facing me. Levinas does not deny equality. However, equality is derived from the original experience of inequality. So it's not as if he's throwing out equality, but equality is not the first principle. The principle of equality is derived from. Prior to any claims of equality in institutional society, which of course we have equalities on all kinds of equalities, the self experiences that her responsibility for the freedom and rights of the other comes before his own. Now, it may seem very contradictory to our experience, but he's going to make this claim, and I'm going to try to use his to make that. When Education for Justice uses equality as the first principle, it focuses on conflict and compromise between competing individuals. So that's the problem with, when we start with the first principle, that's the beginning point, is equality. Then we're going to have to say, well, who's equality? Then we have to sort of work out, start with almost unpacking compromise, conflict, negotiations. Levinas would have us begin our education for justice based upon the precondition of ethical inequality of the other over the self. So, again, now my thesis, equality is founded on the meta-ethical fact. And I hope I will unpack that a little more, what I mean by the meta-ethical fact. The very fact of the face calling me, the meta-ethical fact of the face of the other commanding my unequal responsibility. I cannot demand of the other what I demand of myself. So, how I'm going to do this then is I'm going to show this fact of the other has rights over me. I'm going to tell this story. Is it up there? Not clear, straight, huh? That's because I'm going to tell the story. The fact that the other has rights over me. In the man who is in the midst of his legitimate enjoyable comfort discovers that he isn't number one, that the other comes first, and discovers the basis not only for social justice within community, but also for his own happiness and authentic identity. So that's sort of the story I'm going to tell. This dramatic story has three casts, a cast of three characters. And there they are. There's the self, first cast of character. That's me, that's I, and I will tell the story in the first person, of course, because that's the only person I can. The second is the other who faces me, and I'll likely use Bradley, one of my students here, who's up front conveniently for me to go ahead and say, that face of the other is continuously looking at me. The second is the other who faces and speaks to me in the face-to-face situation. And the third character is the community. That is the other others, joining the self and the other. These other others out here, joining the self and the other, and the multiple others, even those not present on the scene, but related to the self and the other. So her mother, her father, her friend, etc., those people out there. So in a sense, the community contains all those. There's only one. So, wait a minute. Each character then, that as I introduce, the self, the other, and the community, so I'm putting this in the form of this play in a way. Each character introduced in the first act then is going to be dramatically transformed in the second act, and then changed again in the third act. So there, in a sense, is drama to this. There's change, conflict, ultimately resolution. And then the lines of the play, the dialogue, what's it going to be? There's only one line, often repeated throughout, and that is, I say, here I am. That's the one line, basically. The other says to me, here I am. And finally, of course, in the third act, when we get to the multiple others, here we are, in a sense, or here I am in this community of others in which the responsibility for justice. Now, I'm going to give you, here at the bottom, as you can see, the great Jewish word, hanini. And I say the great Jewish word because we can find that in Isaiah, we can find that in Samuel, we can find it in Abraham. All of them, in a sense, said, the Lord called them or something, and they said, hanini, here I am. So it's an often repeated word throughout the Old Testament of the here I am. I'm ready to respond. Okay? So Levinas uses that frequently to give out that notion of the face of the other calls me, and my response must be, should be, ethically should be, hanini. Okay, here's a quick synopsis then. First act tells the story of my freedom and my self-interest, my economic relations with others. I say, here I am, I'm number one. This is me. What else can I do? I'm sorry, but this is me. I'm number one, and I work for my self-interest, and that's it. In the first act, and I'm comfortable. The second act, the needs of the other, command me to radically question my naive egocentrism, and they call me to be responsible. In the third act, this is a quick synopsis then. The third act, the trauma then of this other calling me into question, replacing me as a central character, and finding myself overwhelmed with this responsibility of this other. This experience, this traumatic experience, in a sense, of finding myself with this overwhelming responsibility, converts me from an individual to a citizen. That's the level of justice then. This questioning commands me to cooperate and take a role with others, constructing and applying institutions for justice to serve the rights of everyone. So, the line, here I am, then, of this first act, is changed by the dramatic turn in the second act. So I respond to her call saying, not only in the first act I say, here I am, I'm number one. Second act I say, here I am, I'm ready to be responsible. This dramatic ethical turn then in the second act further points to the conclusion of the third act, where justice is founded on ethical responsibility for multiple others. And then I say in the third act, this one single line, extended, here I am, ready to work for justice with you as a community. Justice then, sort of a corollary, justice is not founded on some abstract principle as social contract theory or even the common good or even God's will, but on the concrete experience. That's what Levinas' phenomenology says. What's the concrete experience of the face of the other? Rather than starting with the principle, I start with a principle that is not really a principle, and that is, it's a concrete other. The face of the other calls me to be responsible. The common good doesn't call me to be responsible. I'm not opposed to the common good, nor is Levinas, nor, in some sense, to the sort of social contracts we have to build once we get into society. Look, we have to agree. I got property, et cetera, et cetera. But those are all derived then. Derived. Now, they're not the first principle. The first principle is the experiential one. Okay. So, here's act, I hope. Act number 1. Have I got this straight? Nope. Because the machine is turned. There we go. Act 1. My life of freedom. At the curtain, I find myself with needs. I find myself with needs. I search for goods, fill these needs, I negotiate and bargain with others. Others have value for me, certainly, by helping me get my goods for myself. Others play a very important role in my life. I label them, I label them as bus driver. Would you take me to work? I label them as student. Student, would you do your homework? I label them as wife. I label them as daughter. I label them as friend. I may even label them as enemy. But they all, in a sense, serve a function. In this first act here, they serve this first function. I have labels for everyone. So at this cognitive level, so here I'm a psychologist, cognitive level, behavioral level, affective level. And so at the cognitive level, I understand others according to my categories and according to my labels. There's student. That's Bradley. There's student, okay. At the behavioral level then, I use others where I need them. That is, I ask, or sometimes I even command others to act according to, do your homework, Bradley, etc. Do the dishes, son, as I say to him, Bus driver, take me to work, etc. So I use people. I not only label them cognitively who they are, but then I even manipulate, I even use. But that's all right in this first act, and it's okay, At the affective level, others are a source of my enjoyment. I enjoy my wife. I enjoy my kids. I enjoy my students. I enjoy you people out here. So you're in a sense, this sort of, I'm in a way consuming you. If we use that in that sort of sense of I'm enjoying you. You are the object of my enjoyment. My freedom makes me the center of my life. This life of freedom is one of separation, privacy, independence. We're all, in a sense, this I-ness of the I. I'm independent in this. And everything else, in a sense, goes out from here. The self experiences itself as the origin and direction of its own happy existence. Levinas has some beautiful descriptions of this innocent, egoic life. As an individual, I'm comfortable, I'm happy, I'm free. I say to myself, here I am. Here I am. This is great. I'm number one. The only drama really then in this first act, this plot, this first act plot is my free economic existence is the difficulty and successes I have. So there's some difficulties and successes I have in my search for fulfillment of my needs. Now, while I carefully categorize others and give them respectful names, bus driver, student, wife, etc., I do, and then I also use them and I enjoy them, but I do recognize that they are the center of their own lives, and they reduce me to their categories, and they use me, and they consume me. I let them do these things to me if it's not too dangerous and cost me too much. After all, life in this first act is a giving-getting system, is it not? We negotiate. It's a capitalistic system, basically, if I could put it to take that notion. It's a free enterprise system. They consume me. That is, I am, in a sense, the source of their enjoyment. This economic model not only supports the exchange of goods and services, but it also supports return favor and reciprocity of kindness. I mean, we live in a world in which we're kind to each other, etc. It also supports the reciprocity of getting even, retaliation, revenge, and therefore it includes conflict, compromise, cooperation. For the most part, it's an enjoyable life, however, competing with others for goods. But in my life of freedom, I'm the one who chooses my responsibility and my justice. So when I define responsibility, when I define freedom, I define my freedom, I define responsibility, I define justice in this first act. I'm the source of my life. Can't argue against that. However comfortable I am naive in this first act when I say, here I am, I'm here and you are there for me. My freedom is central, unchallengeable, even basic to my identity and morality. That's naive. It's a kind of a nice naivete, in a way, huh? And many of us are. When I go home, plop down, have a beer, watch TV, it's a kind of a naivete, huh? But it's a great naivete, and as a matter of fact, it's a very legitimate naivete in a lot of ways. It is. I can't be out there in a sense. But in a way, it is a kind of naivete. He's got good descriptions on the very nature of the home. The home is that place where I sort of go into at night, shut the doors, block out the rest of the world, enjoy myself, sort of revive myself even in preparation for the next day. It's almost like breathing. In the morning, then I get up and I expire out to the world. And then in the evening, I sort of inspire back in, and I revive myself, and I read, and I talk, and I enjoy my wife and kids, and so on. And the next morning, expiring back out. Huh? But while I'm in here, in a way, it is a kind of a naive but very enjoyable first act of simply, I'm the center of my life. But things happen. Act 2. All right. The call to ethical responsibility. In the midst of saying, here I am, the other, the real other now, not some abstract other, some real other, like Bradley or my wife or my something comes upon the scene. The real other breaks through my naive life of freedom and separation and challenges my exclusive self-interest. He contests my self-interest, freedom, contests my theories of individual freedom, the defense of my rights, and my righteous demand for justice. All that's, in a sense, contested by the face of the other individual. When she comes on the stage of my life and faces me, she reveals an ontological nature, her very nature, that is beyond my comprehension. At the cognitive level, then, what I mean by this ontological, at the cognitive level, all my categories, in a sense, are challenged. I mean, yes, I can still call her student, but Bradley looks back at me and she says, listen, fella, I'm more than student. I can call my wife, but she looks back at me and says, careful, fella, I'm more than wife, am I not? So therefore, my labels, sure, they're kind of workable, they're kind of utilitarian, they kind of work all right, but he's got an ontological existence that challenges that very set of categories and labels that I have. So at the cognitive level, my categories and labels are challenged. At the behavioral level, she shows herself beyond my control. I mean, yeah, she does all kinds of things, but she also looks back and said, you don't have control over me. And that's not some sort of rebellious thing. Her very face says, I'm not an object which is controllable. At the affective level, I enjoy her, I enjoy him, but she's not reducible to an object of my enjoyment. She is other than an object I know, I use, enjoy. So the notion of the otherness. the other enters, and that's when Levinas sometimes puts capital O, other. So when she confronts me then, my first reaction very often is a little defensive even, perhaps. I may look the other way. Just not, I don't want to look Bradley. Those eyes are sort of looking at me. Maybe I even do that with my wife, So she's looking at me, says, have you done the day? Oh, gee, I didn't hear her, So that defensively we find ways to sort of escape. There's no doubt about that. I look the other way. But then when the facing of the other faces me and speaks to me, her absolute otherness, her inherent worthiness, therefore, that is her inherent worthiness, not the worthiness that I judge her to have, but her inherent worthiness, independent of my judgment about her worth, her dignity, based solely on her revealing herself as a human person, tells me she is transcendent. She's always more than. So although I can say to the chair, that's nothing more than a chair. The face of the other says back to me, I'm always more than. I may be student, wife, friend, enemy, bus driver, but I'm always more and transcendent, and that always more speaks then to their independent worth, their independent dignity, their independent rights, and therefore, finally then, this inequality. I cannot really understand her existence through my useful categories. What is more, her absolute otherness, her transcendence, insists that I rise above my egocentric nature, that I transcend my own self-interested economy to another level, to the level of ethical responsibility. Her entrance into the stage of my comfortable life confronts me, traumatically transforms me into a responsible self because she is infinitely worthy. She not only transforms me, she transforms my vision of the world and of society. So those three characters in the first act, the other is that other person that I can use and is sort of there alongside of me and so on. And the society is sort of that from which I can get. Now, the other is transformed and society is transformed. The society is transformed from being that wonderful source to fill my needs to being the source for me to help her fill her needs. My economics are no longer based on ego-centered self-interest. Now I'm called into an other-centered concern for her good. Now, obviously, these transformations are not physical changes. Her power to command is not a physical power. It's an ethical power, and that's the whole distance. Because we can all come up with examples and say, well, of course, what are you, naive fella? People are mean to each other all the time. The face of the other doesn't call them, Well, that's right. So there's not a kind of a physical power, but there is an ethical power that the face of the other calls for me. I can look the other way. I can physically resist her. I can use my social position, perhaps, and put her in her social place. I can insist on my rights over her. There's no doubt about these are able for me to do. Now, if I can neither look the other way nor resist her, I can always use the argument of equality. Oh, you're just like me, So, we start off on the same level, so we're equal to each other. I see her as an alter ego. I try to defend my equality by reducing her to being just another me, basically. But her face, facing back to me, says, I'm not like you. Without opening her mouth, her face says, I am other. I have a past that's irreducible to yours. I have a future that's not going to be like yours. I have an ontological existence. Going back to that level, an ontological existence that is unlike you. I am other in the most radical sense. The chair is, of course, other too. But the other person is radically other. They are always more than. cannot be reduced down by my labels. Her radical otherness, her infinite difference, her incomprehensible uniqueness converts my self-interested plot of the first act, even converts my very own self to a higher level. Her otherness that calls me to a higher place is discomforting, certainly. Shocks me, traumatically shocks me from what I was in the first act. It does call me to sacrifice, but this sacrifice is for the better for me. I'm called to a higher. As discomforting as it is, it's not just a competition. It's not like Sartre's hell as other people, in other words, it's just a battle back and forth. When she calls me out and I give up my self-interested, I'm called to a higher place, and I'm a better person, so to speak. While her difference makes me infinitely other, while her difference makes her infinitely other, always more than I can know, far outside my knowledge categories, she is also infinitely close. So I'm going to read a couple more and then talk about this fundamental paradox. She's always there commanding me to be responsible. So as I say, this is the paradox of the other. She is both infinitely far away, that is always other, and infinitely close, always commanding me, always asking me to be responsible. That doesn't mean she's standing there all the time shouting in my ear, be responsible, nag, nag, nag. That's not the point. But the point is ontological, Ontologically, she's always more, and she's always distant, but she's also always calling me. There's no, in a sense, rest. So, ethically, I cannot turn away, as Elie Wiesel says, Wiesel, however it's pronounced. In the face of injustice, one may not look the other way. When someone suffers, he comes first. His very suffering gives him priority. And that's true. Gives him priority. Now, we might say, well, how about all these cases where the other individual's not really suffering? Well, that's true. I mean, in the sense that, but on the other hand, everyone always has some sort of needs. That doesn't mean that I'm always hustling around and involving myself in other people's lives, to try to fix up their needs, not in the least. But they're always, in a sense, calling me to be responsible. Maybe to be responsible is simply back off, leave them alone, not intrude. Maybe being responsible is to try to get them to be responsible. So in the face of my son looks at me and he says explicitly, Dad, do my homework. No, my responsibility is to get him to do his homework. So it's not as if this responsibility that I'm always called to do is not that kind of taking over their responsibility, but I am responsible all the time. Not only can I not reduce her to either an object for me to know, use, and consume, as I say, nor can I reduce her to an alter ego, her radical otherness also reveals her to have a real priority over me. She does not just reveal herself as other. Her face is an epiphany. And I love that word, that sort of shining forth. She shows herself to be. She shines forth as having dignity, worth, independent of my judgment, with its categories of comprehension, beyond my effort to control, and my enjoyments of her as a delightful person. I might even say the same thing with someone my enemy, I might say. Sure, I don't like what my enemy does, and yes, my enemy, and yes, I have to protect myself from my enemy. But the face of the enemy even says, I'm not reducible down to being just your enemy, fella. I've got a dignity, a worth, independent of. I may not approve of your behavior, and I've got a right, but on the other hand, I can't reduce the other down to. No one is irreducible. The other is always more than, not nothing more than. The guy who robbed my house, or the guy who kidnapped and raped the little girl from California. I mean, yes, horrors, these horrible things, and yet on the other hand, the whole notion is the face of the other simply in its face, not in its behavior necessarily in what they say. The face of the other simply says, I have dignity, I have worth, by simply being a human person. Okay. Our positions are reversed then in this second act. from what they were in the first act, when I was the central character. At this level, ethical responsibility, she becomes the center, even the center of me. Levinas says, and I love this line, and it's very cryptic, and it's very extravagant, we might say. The soul is the other in me. Which, Daniel, we're here and we talk about that spirituality, but the soul is the other in me. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to unpack what that means, but really when I am soulful is when I am recognizing the other has got some priority and I'm serving, doing good for the other individual. So the ethical response, in a sense, is the soulful response, perhaps, we might say. Now, this is a non-reciprocal responsibility. It's no longer an economic giving and getting model. I cannot demand from her what I must demand from myself concerning responsibility. Now, we might say, whoa, wait a minute, it's got to be reciprocal. If I'm going to be responsible to her, she's got to be responsible back to me. Well, I cannot get outside of my skin and get in her and make that demand. If I were a third person out here, which we'll finally get to, yes, I make demands of other individuals. But in this first fundamental relationship between myself and the other, it is a non-reciprocal relationship. I am called to responsibility. I would hope that she's called to responsibility by my face too, But I can't get inside her and make her. I'm responsible for my responsibility of the other individual. Okay. Now in the Act 2, called responsibility, and how am I doing? Probably going way too far. Now in the Act 2, called responsibility, that same one line, here I am, changes from I'm here, free, independent, my own person, to the response of responsibility. Here I am, I'm here to be responsible, to not harm, to serve. My freedom, even to be here as an individual, person, even to be free, is based on the freedom invested in me by others. My freedom is not to be used capriciously, but responsibly. So, others invest me freedom, invest in me freedom to be spent for the good of others. This is a powerful notion of Levinas, because we're trying to get at the definitions of freedom, responsibility. He even radically changes freedom. The origin of freedom is not within me, which of course is what we ordinarily think. Look at this. If I want to freely move, look at that. I do that. It's the origin within me. Okay, but the origins, really fundamentally the origins is invested in me. My freedom even to do my dance up here is invested by you, basically, you people who have asked me to give this talk, whatever it is. I go into my classroom. Basically, my freedom to do what is invested by my students in there. I'm at home. Basically, the freedom I have is invested in me, to be used, just when we use that notion of investment, like the economic notion. Give me, and I invest some money to be used properly. Or the investiture procedure we use when we install some leader, some king or pope or queen or whatever, president or something like that. We put on the mantle of investiture, the mantle of vestment over the shoulders of this individual and say, now you use this authority for our services, not for your own. Whether we install a CEO of a Enron, we say, you use this power we're giving. So analogously, Levinas would say, my freedom fundamentally is invested in me. I've got to do it, so I still have freedom. I still am free. It doesn't take away my freedom. It simply calls my freedom to a higher level, which says that I've got to use the freedom for the other individual. Moving right along. Act 3. Life of justice. After the dramatic conversion in the second act, the plot thickens, obviously. More and more people, others, come onto the stage. Now there are 3 or at least 3 or more of us. Now I am called to be responsible for each of these multiple others. Society is now radically different than it was in the first act when I was the egoism, and radically different than it was in the second act when I just thought, well, it's just me and the other, and I'm responsible to the other. Now, I'm called to be responsible for all others. The plot thickens. Because those other others are often in conflict with each other. Bradley's in conflict with Adam over here. God, I'm responsible to both of them. Now what am I going to do? So in the society then, it gets very complex. I not only have responsibility for every other, but now I find these others in conflict with each other, and therefore my responsibility to these others is in conflict. Now my responsibility is in conflict. Now I'm forced to compare these others. I have to now compare Bradley with Adam. To weigh their needs. To decide who's got the greater right. Who's got the biggest need? All that stuff. Who has the act? For me then to act with justice, I must compare these incomparables. Because in one sense they're not comparables. They're infinitely other. Absolutely. I've got to compare. So now I have to use other criteria. I can't compare because they're simply being human persons. They're incomparable. But then I have to do some comparing. Greater needs, greater rights, greater whatever they may be. So in society then, this third act, things change again. Okay. In the plot of Act 3, this act of justice, I must again redefine the cast of these three characters, the self, the other, and society. Now I am the one called to use reason to figure out whose rights come before the rights of others. I have to do that. Now, not alone. Hold on, obviously others, but at least now I've got to do more than simply be obligated to an individual. Now I have to begin to use reason to figure out. Back in the plot of the responsibility, that is the plot of Act number 2, reason was not really required. I didn't have to stop and figure out. I may have had to stop and figure out how am I going to do it. How shall I get the needs and so on. But basically, reason is not really called forth when just in responsibility. Reason is required, only responsibility. There was no call to compare, to weigh rights, to figure things out. The other was radically other than me and incomparable to me, therefore. She has rights over me, while all others were equal to each other. I was not. Everyone had equal rights. In responsibility, all others had rights over me. Now, however, in Act 3, I've got to compare. I've got to do this work. Now, I realize how naive I was in the first act, and I realize how naive I was in the second act. Now it gets, as I say, the plot thickens. So now in the third act, I find I was naive, and when I considered myself responsible only for the other. Life gets complicated. Life gets hard when life gets complicated. I'm responsible for all others, even if other others are not physically present. And I've already said this in a sense, so I'll go through it. Not on the stage with me. So not only am I responsible to Bradley, but Bradley's family hurts, etc. So I'm responsible, so there's this extension. So I can't just say I'm responsible for only the other. I'm also called to be called to the transcendent level of responsibility, not only for her, but for those related to her, as I said. Okay, everyone is related to her as a fellow human, not just her genetic origin of people. I must weigh the consequences of my action towards the immediate other, towards the other others, and I repeat then this, here I am, I'm responsible for all others. I love this quote. Levinas frequently quotes Dostoevsky from the Brothers Karamazov, who says, we are all responsible for all men, before all others, and I more than all others. That's Dostoevsky saying that, not just sort of Levinas. This condition of being called to compare is the origin of justice, as I say. Justice begins in recognizing my responsibility to all others, and then to figure out how to responsibly respond. Justice comes from reasoning, but a kind of reasoning founded on the pre-given revelation of the otherness and worth of the other having priority over me. Ethical responsibility does not follow from reasoning. It is pre-given. It is factual. And that's radically. Generally, we think responsibility is sort of we figure out responsibility. No, Levinas says responsibility is the pre-given. We figure out justice, but we don't figure out responsibility. That's inherent in the very nature of being a human person. The origin of ethical responsibility is from this revelation of the other as having rights over me. Justice is comparing the rights of multiple others, solidly founded on, etc., etc. So I'm going to try to move up here a little bit. Now, the problem is, obviously I can't fulfill. So we can finally get to society, basically. I can't fulfill all this responsibility. I mean, this is too overwhelming. There's too many of them. I'm sorry, folks, but I just can't do it, So, now I have to take another role. Now I have to begin to say, let's form society. Let's begin to... I'm still responsible. I haven't eased up on my responsibility. It's just that we have to now... So, the needs are beyond me. I recognize others are also responsible for others. I recognize that Bradley's a little responsible for Adam over here, because I can sort of see that responsibility. We must cooperate with each other and construct a system to fulfill our responsibility. I must do what I can for the immediate other, but I'm also responsible to help construct and participate in just social systems. Now, finally, however, how about me? Finally, when I see that others are others to each other, when I see that Bradley and Adam are others to each other, then I see that I'm also an other to others, including this original other to whom I was first given this responsibility. Now I can demand justice for my rights as well. My rights are not original, so I do have this right to demand justice, but that's not an original. It's founded upon my original inequality. Now, however, in society, I can demand my own rights because I'm within a social system, and I see that others have responsibilities as well. Okay. In this final plot of the resolution of the third act, the life of an adult, I'll call it, I must redefine myself. Now I have these 5 roles, basically. First of all, I can still be the one naive and innocent when separated into myself. I can still return home, kick back, put my feet up on a chair and, lay back and drink a beer and watch TV, whatever it is. I still can do that, And I am responsible, in a sense, to my loved ones, bonded by love. But I have to play a second role. The second role is I'm the one whose naivete is broken by being called out by myself, out of my self-interest by the other. Even a stranger must call me out of myself, to be responsible to and for her. Third, I'm the one responsible for all others, both present and absent, as I've already said. Fourth, now I'm the one aware that I must cooperate with others in society to fulfill my responsibility to others. And finally, I am the one able to demand my own rights. In Act 3, the other is not only the one to whom I'm responsible, but also the one who has responsible to and for others, even to me. I experience society now and justice as that community where there are multiple rights, multiple responsibilities. It is a place in which we struggle together, negotiating about these rights, which rights need supporting, in what conditions, and so on, so on. So now I say, here I am, ready to be responsible. Here I am. I'm here to work with all of you to work in a just society. That never releases me from that original, here I am, to be responsible. So in other words, my original responsibility doesn't go away now that I live in society. It's added on. Okay. Now, what I want to do, how much time do I have? I'm going to skip a little. What I have what do I do with this? So I've got this sort of philosophy, in a sense, of the priority of the other over the self. And what I do then is I teach And I use this philosophy to teach social justice. And rather than my teaching social justice with some sort of abstract set of theories, here's Kant, here's Hegel, here's trot in these people, here's the church, etc., here's the state, here's the communism, here's individualism, etc., etc. I send students out into the face of other individuals. We teach social justice with service learning is what we call it at Seattle U, and I think most every place else has lots of it. We send students into the community to witness and work with generous people, working in service agencies, filling the needs of others. That's where they learn justice, facing other individuals. Now, it requires some reflection. So back in class, we do the reflection on what this means. But the teachers of justice, fundamentally, teachers of responsibility, fundamentally are the other individuals, the clients and the workers out there. They work for the common good. This is true. So anyway, this is what I teach them. Now, I also want to get to, and I want to complete this, and I also use this for teaching. Psychotherapy. This philosophy that begins with the face of the other commanding the self to be responsible should be the foundation for psychotherapy. There's no profession that requires us to respond to the face of the other more than psychotherapy. I mean, I can go see my economic advisor, but there's always something between us, all this data and all this stuff, what's our retirement plan, all this. But psychotherapy is fundamentally that experience of the face of the other individual. That's all we have, is our faces, basically. Sure, we got our stories, but, the face of the other. The ethical call awakens me to the face of my client that commands me to not judge her according to some set of categories, such as the DSM. I mean, a useful tool, perhaps, But if I begin to use that DSM as that which reduces her down to what she is, to more than, or to less than what she is, rather than allowing her to say, I am more than, the ethical call awakens me to her face and commands me to not manipulate her according to my clinical goals or something that's established by the mental health community, whatever it is. Now, in therapy, and I'll try to, how much time do I have? Okay. In therapy, speaking is primarily speaking to and secondarily speaking about. Okay? We've got that sort of line. In therapy, speaking is primarily speaking to. It's not that it's not speaking about, because of course we do speak about, their suffering situation and so on. But what's fundamental important is the speaking to, not the speaking about. In the face-to-face setting, the client says, even without having to open her mouth yet, here I am. That face is looking back at me. She doesn't have to tell me her troubling story as yet. That simply that face is saying, here I am. Her face does not say, here I am as a representative of depressives. No. Her face says, I am the one here. And while the client narrates her story, her face says, I'm the one before you, speaking about a suffering that only I have experienced. I'm not just telling a story about suffering. This is my suffering. I am here. Others are not here. I am uniquely here. I'm here, and this suffering I'm telling you about is unique. Don't reduce it down to generalized suffering. The face of the client says more. I'm more than just here. I'm here as vulnerable. More vulnerable here than when I'm out on the street. More vulnerable than you are vulnerable, therapist. In here, I lower my defenses because I'm trusting you. So I am perhaps vulnerable by being trusting. And trust I give myself. I don't give you you don't give me your story. I'm giving you my story. And in a sense, that face is also saying, can I trust you to not abuse me? Can I trust that you will not serve, that you will serve my needs before you use me to serve your own needs, to be an excellent therapist or get more money, or so you can write an article for the next convention or conference or whatever it is? Huh? Are you really going to serve my needs? She goes on to say, other than myself, I have no witnesses here to verify my story. I'm my only witness. My face is saying what is coming out of my mouth is true. Now, that doesn't mean that clients can't lie. Of course clients can lie, and clients do lie. Huh? There's no doubt about that. So I'm not saying, but I only know that it's a lie precisely because their face is saying this is the truth. When I find out that the other individual has lied to me, told me that it's not the truth, that's what really hurts. Any lie, because their face is saying, saying this is the truth, what I'm saying. And therefore, again, in the therapy situation, that client's face is saying, this is the truth. This is the way I witnessed it. I'm my own witness. This is the way it happened. Now again, I'm not saying that they can't lie and that try to manipulate me and all kinds of other things. The face of the client says, I'm here bearing my own witness to the pain that only I suffer. I'm not only here in front of you, I'm also here seeing you, therapist, seeing me. I see you witnessing me as the one before you, as the one talking about my suffering and bearing witness to its reality. As I speak about my suffering, I see you as the one here hearing my problems. Nobody else is here. You're here. And I appeal to you, therapist, to express back to me, here I am. I'm here with you. The client says, don't tell me you are only a representative of the profession of therapist. Say, I am here. This individual, that's what the client wants me to say back to them. I'm here with you. I want you to say back to me, yes, I'm here. Yes, I hear you. I'm not only here with you, I'm for you. Now, my argument then is, and I quickly tie this up, that fundamentally this ethical is what is therapeutic. Sure, the stories, the techniques, the knowledge, the expertise of the therapist, very important, no doubt about it. But this fundamental notion of the ethical is what is therapeutic. Not ethical as they're defined by the American Psychological Association, and et cetera, et cetera. But this, as I've described it, this fundamental relationship in which the client says to me, here I am. And the therapist responds, here I am. That's what's therapeutic. So whether we're going to call it therapeutic alliance, whether we call it unconditional positive regard, whatever it is, call it anything you want, but it is this relationship, this fundamental relationship of two individuals, and one saying, here I am. Absolutely distinct, absolutely unique, with distinct suffering, with a distinct story. There you are, doctor. Would you be here with me? Would you look at me, etc.? Okay. So I got to quit here. That's enough. In conclusion, did we leave any time, huh? Well, it looks like on my clock 4 minutes, huh? If anybody wants to get up and leave because they're so hungry, huh? They want to leave, okay. But if anybody's got any quick questions, 4 minutes. Yeah, Adam. Who was Emmanuel Levinas? Thank you for reminding me.
What was his life? How did he live? What did he do?
Emmanuel Levinas was born in Lithuania. He studied under Heidegger, Husserl, all those folks, and he moved because he was Jewish, and he moved to Paris to escape Germany, and his family was all killed in Lithuania, and he served in the military, and the French military, was captured, spent time in the concentration camp. No, not concentration, military prison, okay, because he was saved then, and then he stayed in France, and so he taught at the Sorbonne, and he died in 1995. 95. Yeah. He was, well, I don't know if I can pin that down, Adam, but I can say that for a long period of time, he was in charge of preparing teachers to go out and teach in Jewish schools and around the Mediterranean basin. And I can't give you the French name. Pardon? He did most of his writing actually later on. Huh? So his first book was 1961, I think, something like that. He was born in 1905. Huh? So he was getting on before he wrote some articles and so on, but then... yes, that's right. And then a lot of articles and so on into the 80s, and even into the 90s, and died in 1995. Is becoming more and more known around the world among philosophers, not enough among psychologists. I find him so terribly important for psychologists, social workers, whoever else. Philosophers are kind of dabbling in what he said, but they're still leaving it a little abstract, and I find that it's important. Now, why I'm glad you did, because this is my book in which I try to make a lot of Levinas accessible, because it is very difficult. As you all know, Heidegger's hard to read, Husserl's hard to read, all those guys are hard to read. I tried to make Levinas as accessible as possible. The paradox of power and weakness, and the second thing, I tried to make it applicable in some sense to psychology too. Okay, and then the second book that I'm holding up here, Psychology for the Other. This is a list of a group of articles by other authors about Levinas and psychology. So they're both out there on the table. So anyway, any other quickies?
I just have a real quick question. In light of Levinas, how would you understand the difference right there between having the client lay on the couch versus facing?
Well, as most modern psychologists, I wouldn't have the client on the couch. I'd face the client, so that the client can not only be seen, but see me seeing. And so, therefore, I think it's absolutely essential, this face-to-face relationship.
Nobody does the couch.
Nobody does the couch anymore.
But it seems to be a significant shift.
Yeah, that's right. No priest does the confessional anymore, back behind hidden either. So, in a sense, now confessionals. Well, there's probably some old conservative priests that do that, but in a sense, we much more the face-to-face. In a sense, we recognize that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, the interpersonal is that primary, that relationship with the other. Then derive, yes, this interaction in society and so on that I have, in a situation. Well, he's originally founding it on the one-on-one. He doesn't really talk much about social groups fighting, although he did get a little bit involved in the kind of the politics of the Palestinians and the Israelis and so on. A little difficulty with that, but fundamentally he's saying a lot of what the Israeli state is doing to the Palestinians is wrong. Okay, thank you very much.